Good afternoon and welcome to Election Bites, bite-sized conversations for your lunch hour. My name is Avery Davis Roberts and I'm Associate Director in the Carter Center's Democracy Program. And today we are very fortunate to be joined by Larry Garber, who is an international election expert with 35 years of global experience working on elections. He has been working closely with me and the Carter Center team on our work around the elections last year, and is also a member of the National Task Force on Election Crises. And today we're going to be sort of reflecting on the 2020 elections, taking stock, really trying to just, sort of close the loop on 2020 before we start looking forward in subsequent election bites. So Larry, let's start off with what went well in 2020 and what you thought could be improved.
Thanks, Avery, and great to be here. I was a little worried that after my last appearance, which was on January 6th, when I confidently predicted that Congress would reject all of the complaints, which was accurate, but totally missed the horror and tragedy of that day, that I might not be invited back. So it's good to be here. So I think it is important that we reflect on the election process of 2020 and not just focus on what happened on January 6th. And so I would just highlight four specific things. First of all, obviously there was a successful conduct of an election during the pandemic with the highest turnout that we've had in more than 100 years. 67% of the eligible voters participated, which is not great compared to some other democracies, but for the United States actually is quite impressive. Second, our election administrators across the country did an incredible job working to ensure that the process went smoothly. I think the media's role also was crucial in communicating ahead of time that the results would not necessarily be available on election night for the presidential election, and encouraging people to be patient and waiting for the projections that would be based on the results as they came in, which was slower this year than in the past. And then the last thing I think, which was really impressive, was the court's ability to resolve, the election complaints in a timely manner, so that by the federally mandated December 8th safe harbor date, virtually all the relevant litigation had been completed.
Maybe just sort of taking a little bit of a deeper dive on the question of election administration. You said that election administrators performed well. Could you elaborate on that a little bit?
Sure. So first of all, I think it's important to note that, there were in some ways very low expectations given what had happened during the primary season, when there was lots of problems. I know you worked as an election official in Georgia, and, the reports that we all were getting was that, there was going to be problems in November or in the early voting. And to their credit, the election administrators really took stock, worked hard, and prepared to ensure that the defects that had emerged in the primary season were resolved. So materials were prepared in a timely and correct manner. The local officials in most places seemed well trained, or at least sufficiently well trained, that there were no major hiccups that I think a lot of people feared, and that they worked regardless of party affiliation, both at the very local level as well as at the more senior levels, in a cooperative manner with the goal of delivering the results. And many of us who've been through elections before, I think, feared something like a 2000 election experience where a Secretary of State responsible for administering the elections became involved in the process in a very partisan manner. And that didn't happen this go around, despite, some pretty intense partisan political pressure. I mean, it was perhaps most obvious in Georgia, with the efforts to pressure Secretary of State Brad Raffensperger. But similar efforts, at a different level, also occurred in other states, and the Secretary of State's, to their credit, proved immune to those pressures, and I think deserve tremendous credit for ensuring the integrity of the process.
Clearly, we all are quite aware that this election took place in the context of the pandemic. Could you speak to any innovations that sort of emerged as a result of that sort of broader health context?
Sure. I mean, I think the most significant innovations this go round was to ensure that people would be able to vote in the election safely. And so um, the major effort was to provide both early in-person voting, which spread out the numbers of people who would have to show up on November 3rd, and to provide mail-in voting for those who preferred not to show up in person at all. And the numbers tell the story here, Avery. So more than 100 million people out of the 157 million who voted this year voted before November 3rd. So 2/3 of the vote was, in before November 3rd, which meant, as many people reported, that November 3rd seemed very, quiet and mellow in many precincts. 65 million people voted by mail in 2020, and this compares to 24 million who voted by mail in 2016. So, I mean, just that number is just extraordinary in terms of increase. And the early voting went up from approximately 24 million in 2016 to 36 million this year. So, just those numbers itself. And again, it doesn't just happen. I mean, if you do mail in voting, you have all kinds of procedures that you have to put in place to ensure and guarantee the integrity of the process. And for early voting, I mean, you have to, set up precincts where people can physically come. So it costs money, it costs time to get the, people trained up in advance, get the materials out, make sure there are guarantees to protect against people voting more than once and the like. And again, I mean, to their credit, the election officials across the country were able to do so that there were, really few allegations of, fraud and irregularities in that regard.
Thanks, Larry. So, just sort of picking up on that theme of sort of fraud, irregularities, you talked about the integrity of the process. You mentioned that. Could you sort of elaborate on the integrity of the process in 2020? And was there any need for us to be concerned about that?
Well, it's always the dog that didn't bark type story. I mean, there was lots of things done this year in particular to make sure that there were plenty of security features and to protect the integrity of the process. Um, I would list five important things that I think were critical this year. First of all, in growing number of states, there is an effort to ensure that people get to see a paper ballot before they actually deposit it. So it's not just punching numbers on a screen, then putting submit and not knowing what happens. And I think that in terms of voter confidence, it's a very important step that's being taken. Second, I think obviously certainly this is something we preach all the time, is the importance of having party poll watchers present at the polling sites. And again, I think both parties, did an incredible job of recruiting folks to be present and to make sure that all aspects of the process were monitored. I think the media, always plays an important role, both in, covering, the campaign process and then election day, but particularly becomes critically important in, receiving the results and putting a context around them in terms of releasing them to the public. And I think, that contributed also to the integrity. Again, I think this year and hopefully growing in the future will be these audits that are being conducted at state levels, different types of audits for different situations, but collectively, I think they contribute to the integrity. And then last is, providing processes for the resolution of election disputes, both at the federal and state levels.
Just picking up on that last point about the resolution of disputes, how did that go?
Um, so we're a very litigious society. So certainly before the election, before November 3rd, there were hundreds of cases filed by both the Republican and Democratic parties challenging, various aspects of the electoral procedures in the states, sometimes in federal courts. Some of these cases were resolved in favor of the Democrats, some were resolved in favor of the Republicans. But the important point here is that this litigation, the pre-election litigation, did not in the end interfere in any way with carrying out the election and providing citizens with their right to vote. Following the elections, more than 60 cases were filed by the Trump campaign and the Republican Party, raising a range of issues under which claims were made about the fairness of the process, in some cases made about the laws themselves. And remarkably, the courts in decisions which were made by a diverse group of judges, including many who had been appointed by President Trump, by former President Trump, concluded that that there was no validity to any of these cases, whether on the facts or on the law, dismissed them. And I think that's important, obviously, both in terms of certifying and confirming the credibility of this election and election results, which led to Joe Biden being inaugurated as president. But I think they also reinforced in a very important manner the independence of our judiciary. We constantly, and I think unfortunately, refer to judges as, oh, he was appointed by a Republican president, or she was appointed by a Democratic president. And I think just having this type of outcome where 60 judges appointed by all kinds of different presidents, going back 20, 30 years, Republicans, Democrats, all uniformly coming to the same conclusion, was incredibly important for not only the election, but also for the judiciary itself.
Thanks, Larry. So overall, if this was a movie review, you'd give it maybe 2 thumbs up in 2020, it sounds like. Okay.
I'm 2 thumbs up, but I'm still with the stars, and I give it 3.5 or 4, close to 4 stars for this election. I think again, the people who are involved, including yourself, really did an incredible job and deserve the gratitude of all Americans.
Thanks, Larry. And so important to note, 4.5, 4 stars, there's still room for improvement. And we will be talking about that in the next Election Bites when we're sort of looking forward and thinking about what kinds of reforms might be in the works. So we hope that you'll join us all next week for that conversation. And thank you so much.
My pleasure, Avery.